Welcome to PeopleTools Tech Tips. I'm Randall Groncki. Let's compare null values in an Oracle database. If you're still with me, welcome. Most of the PeopleSoft environments I've worked on in the past 10 years or so use an Oracle database at the back end. PeopleSoft in general doesn't like null values. The only field types that allow for null values are date and datetime fields. All the other field types are declared as not null and use a space or zero as a default nothing. Even though a date field can be null, you may want to consider making that field required if it's a key on your table. As you can imagine, since I'm making this video, I ran into some issues with nulls and date fields. I was comparing rows of data in a temp table versus another table that held the previous values, and I ran into a problem during my unit testing. I knew what rows I was expecting to be returned as different, but the numbers were all wrong. I was getting way too many rows showing as different when they weren't. Why? Because I forgot that some of my data fields were null, and I can't directly compare a null to a null. Something I banged my forehead against the wall over and over again until I remembered some of my basics. Here's the gist if you want to skip to the end of the video. When comparing fields with null values, null does not equal null. At the same time, null does not equal null. You can compare the same null field from the same row of a table and the answers will always be false. Here's my example in SQL Developer. This SQL returns one row of data from the PeopleSoft HCM table. We can see that the position entry date field is null. Now, let's compare that field to itself. Let's run that. We should get our same row returned since that field is null and null equals null, right? Wrong. Null does not equal null. Okay, so let's change the comparison operator to not equals and see what happens. If null doesn't equal null, then this should return our data. Wrong again. So how should we compare these fields? Use Oracle's NVL function on any field that may contain a null to force it to a known value should that field be null. If the field does have a value that's not a null, then that value will be returned. Here's our statement using the NVL function on the position entry date field to force it to the date January 1st, 1801 if that value is null. Generally, know your data so that the substitute value returned should never occur in your data set. In this case, I can't imagine a person with a position entry date in the early 1800s. Running the statement again, we see that our comparison with null values now correctly returns our row of data. I'll open this statement to return lots of rows so we can see how the NVL function works with both null values and actual values. The NVL function works for both cases where data exists and where it's null. So hopefully this will save you a little time when you have a case to compare fields which may contain nulls. Know your data and know what is a good substitute for a null that will still return the results you need. And maybe this saved you from having a head-shaped dent in your wall like I now have in my office. Thanks for watching. Please consider subscribing to our channel, and we'll see you next time here on PeopleTools Tech Tips.